Welcome back, chess friends, to 1834, where McDonnell and Labourdonnais have been playing their unofficial World Chess Championship match. The state of play so far is that Labourdonnais has already won the match, because it's best of 21 and he's already got 11 games to McDonnell's 2. However, I guess Labourdonnais, being a gentleman, is allowing McDonnell the opportunity to make the scoreline less bad by playing out the remaining games. Or maybe he's just interested in showing how dominant he is and crushing him even harder. But we'll see. Will McDonnell claw his way back to make the scoreline less bad? He has the white pieces and he starts this game, the 18th game, with e4. We have e5 from Labourdonnais, and McDonnell, of course, goes for the King's Gambit. We've had one King's Gambit before in this match, which McDonnell lost. So again, not looking too good for McDonnell from the start. But maybe he's got some better ideas this time. He accepts the gambit, bishop to c4, and of course queen to h4 with check, so McDonnell moves the king aside, which loses castling privileges, as we all know. And Labourdonnais carries on with g5. He wants to keep the pressure on the king side here, so he's trying to get as close as he can to the king. McDonnell calmly plays knight to c3, which is fine, and then we have bishop to g7 and d4, claiming more space in the centre. A good move here for Labourdonnais might be d6 to let the light square bishop out to get over more power over to the king side, or maybe knight to f6, same idea, getting the knight closer to the king. But he plays neither. He plays knight to c6, which is not bad, but he could have pressed the attack a bit harder sooner, I think. And McDonnell reacts to this not by playing knight to f3 and chasing away the queen immediately with tempo, developing another piece, which would have been good for him. Instead, he plays e5, moving this pawn a second time, which is not good. But maybe McDonnell knows the King's Gambit better than I, which is quite likely. But we'll see how he gets on. We have knight on g to e7, and then knight to f3, playing this development with tempo move, maybe one move too late. And of course the queen moves back. Now we have knight on e4. He's moved the knight a second time from its starting position, refusing to develop more pieces, so not good, but again, maybe he knows better than I. h6 from Labourdonnais, and McDonnell moves his knight a third time to f6, which comes with check and forks the queen. So again, not developing his pieces. It forces the exchange here. Maybe McDonnell knows the King's Gambit better than the engine, but the engine is saying this gives black a lot of advantage, and actually h4 was a much better move. So let's see if McDonnell gets away with this. The exchange is forced, so the bishop captures the knight, the pawn captures back, which threatens this knight, but Labourdonnais doesn't mind. He pushes d5 and attacks the bishop. And McDonnell wants to keep this nice bishop, so he retreats to d3, and Labourdonnais gets out of danger with the knight to f5, which is defended by this bishop. And McDonnell now goes on the attack. Queen to e1 with check along the open file, so Labourdonnais moves his king out of the way to d8. So both players now can't castle. They've both lost their castling powers. And the game continues with the knight to e5. And now this is quite a complicated position now. It's a few lines to go through, but I'll give you first the move that was actually played. It was knight on f captures on d4. And Morphy comments here. He says that Labourdonnais was apprehensive of bishop to e2. And the following shows that knight to g3 with check with a view of winning the exchange would have lost black the game. Suppose knight to g3 with check, then king to g1, and then the knight captures. Then the white knight delivers a check by capturing the knight on c6, and black's best move is king to d7, but white mates in 3 moves. And that's where Morphy stops, but we can extrapolate because it's actually quite nice here. We'd have knight to b8 with check, and now if the king moves back, then it's an instant checkmate here, protected by the pawn. So that's no good for black. If black moves forwards, then we have checkmate here. These squares are covered by the knight, these squares are covered by the queen. The pawn protects the queen, and the queen is delivering the fatal blow. So very nice. But what about the rook capturing on, instead of moving the king, the rook capturing here? Well, we have bishop delivering a check. The pawn blocks, but it doesn't matter because it's just checkmate with queen to e7. So very nice variations here, protected by the pawn. And we can go back, and Morphy says that black's proper move in this position would have been rook to e8. But again, he doesn't elaborate, he just stops there. So let's try to extrapolate again. We'd maybe have bishop to e2, knight to g3 with check now. The queen takes the knight, and the queen takes the bishop with check. King takes the queen, the pawn takes the queen, and it does look like black is better. So what Morphy was saying, it was true that rook to e8 was a good move that was better than the one that was played. However, the engine has an even better line, so let's go through that one. If we have the knight captures the knight, and then McDonnell has the choice of capturing back with the pawn or the queen, but both are terrible. So let's just quickly go through them. If the pawn captures, then simply f3 wrecks McDonnell's position. The king is rather exposed, the knight's coming in with all sorts of forks, the pawn's looking like it's just going to cause damage, everything's backed up by the queen, the bishop's going to come in easily, and the rook can come across, so it's not good. If the queen captures, probably even worse. Let's go through this in a bit more detail. The knight's coming to g3 with this fork. Now wherever the king goes, it's bad. If he goes here, then it's going to be checkmate. McDonnell can only block and just lose all his pieces until the mate. If the pawn captures the knight, we have check here, and it's just devastation. The rook's coming across, the bishop's coming across to help. Yeah, and it's all bad. If the king moves to e1, then we simply have rook coming across, picking up the queen with a pin. So all bad for McDonnell. However, Bourdonnais did not play this knight captures knight move. As we said, he captured d4. And he's no longer winning, he's drawing the game now. So McDonnell's back in it. Let's see how it continues. c3 attacking this knight, but Bourdonnais ignores it and captures the white knight instead. So McDonnell captures back with the queen, which threatens checkmate on e7. So Bourdonnais has to deal with this, and he does so by retreating his knight to c6, which attacks the queen and protects the checkmating square. However, this move actually loses the game. He's no longer drawing, white is now winning. But having said that, I'm not surprised Bourdonnais didn't see the drawing move, because it's actually pretty crazy, a mad engine line. So let's see how this works. Instead of knight to c6, it's actually bishop out to h3, which vacates the c8 square for the king to retreat to. So coming here doesn't finish off black. So let's continue this engine line, and it's a little bit long, so I'm going to zoom through it quickly. We have the queen captures, the king retreats, and now the pawn captures the bishop, and the queen captures back, delivering check. We have king getting out of the way of the check, the pawn comes forward, the bishop captures here, and it's under attack here, but it releases white's pieces. We have the queen checking, so the king moves out of the way. We have the rook attacking the queen, so the queen moves out of the way. Knight to c2, captures back here, and now a check from the queen. So the king moves aside, and this is offering a queen exchange, but black ignores it and captures the bishop with check. So the queen captures back, and now we have a perpetual check. So check with a skewer. King moves aside, we have check again with the skewer, and the king moves aside, and so on. And that's the draw that Bourdonnais missed, but I'm not surprised that he did miss. So now, going back to the position that we were in with the knight to c6. Excuse me, I'll find it eventually. There we go, knight to c6. McDonnell is now winning, so he's looking good for his at least one consolation game. We continue. So the queen's under attack, so it moves and captures the pawn, delivers a check. We have king to e8, and then bishop to b5. This knight is now pinned. We have bishop to e6, threatening the queen, and the bishop captures with check. And now the king moves to f8. Now you might be wondering, why didn't Bourdonnais capture the bishop with the pawn? Well, what happens? We have the queen captures back with check, which forks the rook, and the king's only got two squares to go to. If he goes to this one, he's lost the rook. If he goes to this one, it's even worse. It's checkmate. Once the bishop blocks, it's all over. This pawn is covering these two squares and the queen is delivering the mate. So that's not an option. So king to f8. And now queen to c5 with check, and the king's only got one square. This bishop is still under attack now, so it retreats and attacks the queen. The queen retreats, the white queen comes to d4, and now Bourdonnais attacks it with c5. And it seems here that McDonnell doesn't want to capture this pawn because the black queen will capture this pawn. So instead he decides to move his queen to e5 and keep an eye on it. But Morphy comments here, he says, "The last two moves with the queen are not good. He ought to have played queen to f2 or b3. Okay, Morphy, he didn't. He played queen to e5 here. Rook to e8, x-raying the queen, and McDonnell reacts by bringing the bishop back to e2, and Morphy says, "This is clearly fatal." Almost all the commentators here recommended queen takes c5. But in that case, black might have obtained an almost winning attack by g4, etc. Okay, so Morphy says a lot of people recommended this move, but he doesn't agree. What does he recommend instead? Well, he says, "The correct course was to play king to f2, after which white, with ordinary care, ought to have won without much trouble. If black then checked at c2, white would have interposed the queen. If again bishop to d7, then white would have moved the queen to d6. And if g4, white would play bishop to e4. Okay, so Morphy is not happy with what McDonnell played, and he's not happy with what the commentators recommended. And I don't think anybody's happy with what McDonnell played, because he's just lost the game again. Everybody wants McDonnell to win his consolation game, but it appears not to be happening this time round. Okay, so let's get back to the position that was actually played. At this point, Bourdonnais pushes the pawn. And now, if the bishop captures back, then the black bishop is coming to c4 with a check, and McDonnell is losing the queen. And if the pawn captures back, again, bishop checks, this time on h3, and again, McDonnell is losing the queen. So he cannot capture this pawn back. So instead, he plays king to f2. Too late, of course. We have the pawn captures the bishop, and now bishop to e3, finally developing this bishop that's been stuck on its starting square the entire game. Again, McDonnell's ignoring his development. Maybe he ought to think more about that in forthcoming games. We have b6, and McDonnell plays the move recommended by the engine, h4, but Morphy's in a grumpy mood by now, and he says, "This again was far from being well played, but did not affect the ultimate result." Okay, Morphy. And we have bishop back to d7, revealing the attack on the queen, and the queen moves out of the way to d5. Bourdonnais captures the pawn with check, and now McDonnell captures the e2 pawn, which is actually terrible. Queen to f3 would have prolonged the game. Capturing here just finishes it almost instantly. We have bishop delivering a check here, and now McDonnell can't retreat because he'll just lose the bishop to the rook. He can't come to this file because the queen's protecting it. So what does he do? He moves his king to d2, and of course this walks into this pin, and so he's lost his queen. And this was enough for McDonnell. He gives up the game, and he makes Bourdonnais look even stronger. He didn't win his consolation game, but well, maybe in one of the forthcoming games he will be able to get back that one game that he's looking for. I'll see you next time for game 19 and see how he gets on.